Good morning, everybody. It's 7:06, almost 7:07 a.m. here at K-Talk Radio. That means our guest, John Taylor Gatto, has been on hold a little bit longer than I promised. I guess that gives him a chance to sort of get his bearings and get ready for our interview this morning. I'm Dale Williams, sitting in for Jack Stockwell. You've got AM 630. I don't know if you've stumbled on to us or you're here on purpose, but this is going to be an unusual interval on AM 630 on K-Talk Radio in Salt Lake City. It's a chance to talk with a gentleman who is in short supply, who is in great demand. I'm going to dispense with a lot of biographical information about Mr. John Taylor Gatto. We might get to some of that, his years growing up in Monongahela, New York. I'm almost a New York native, having moved there when I was about 4.5, and I am certainly a product of 12 years of the New York State public school system. So Mr. Gatto and I will have a little bit of a common background here to talk from, and I'm very anxious to bring him on. But let me just tell you a couple things about him from the get-go here. Each year, from 1989 to 1991, he was named New York City Teacher of the Year. In 1991, the New York State Senate named him New York State Teacher of the Year. Now, I'm going to hit the cough button. We have a little bit of that cold thing going on this morning, and you bear with me with this, please. I sent a short essay. I'm going to quote now from Mr. Gatto shortly after his appointment, I suppose, or his award of State Teacher of the Year. He said in a letter, I sent a short essay to the Wall Street Journal titled, "I Quit, I Think." In it, I explained my reasons for deciding to wrap it up, even though I had no savings and not the slightest idea what else I might do in my mid-50s to pay the rent. In its entirety, it read like this, quote, "The little essay went off in March, and I forgot it. Somewhere along the way, I must have gotten a note saying it would be published at the editor's discretion, but if so, it was quickly forgotten in the press of turbulent feelings that accompanied my own internal struggle. Finally, on July 5th, 1991, I swallowed hard and quit. 20 days later, the Journal published the piece. A week later, I was studying invitations to speak at NASA Space Center, the Western White House, the Nashville Center for the Arts, Columbia Graduate Business School, the Colorado Librarians Convention, Apple Computer, and the Financial Control Board of the United Technologies Corporation. 9 years later, still enveloped in the orbit of compulsion schooling. I had spoken 750 times in 50 states and 7 foreign countries. I had no agent and never advertised, but a lot of people made an effort to find me. It was as if parents were starving for someone to tell the truth. Now, hopefully without embarrassing him, I must tell you that to homeschoolers and to people who spent 12 years in the educational gulag in this country like myself, Mr. Gatto is our single combat warrior. He's a guy, he is the ultimate Don Quixote, and the man a lot of us wish had come around 30 years or so before he did, and to save us a lot of trouble. Anyway, with all that, good morning, John. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Dale.
It is a privilege to talk with you. The whole business of writing this letter that ended up, it was published, your sort of separation letter was published in the Wall Street Journal, if I remember right?
It was, on the op-ed page.
And you, of course, had sent it, as we just mentioned, you had sent that letter in, but having no expectation that it would really be published, I would think.
No, I didn't. And I wasn't even sure that I was going to quit.
So that kind of sealed the deal. Of course, by the time it got published, you had quit, correct?
Yes, 10 days before.
And so there was no going back after that.
Well, there was no going back to a classroom in New York City, but little did I suspect that I'd be going to larger classrooms in Budapest and in Pakistan and Australia and every American state and every Canadian province. I kept waiting for it to stop so I could retire, but
And now this has been 16 years, and it never has stopped, has it?
It never has stopped. I just got back. In fact, you catch me in a recovery mode. I spoke in 10 Australian cities, then flew to Salt Lake and spoke out there, and immediately went to the airport and flew to Budapest. So by the time I got back home, and home is a farm in upstate New York now, about an hour from Ithaca, but I was disintegrated, and I'm just now coming back together.
Well, John, you know, as I mentioned, I spent 12 years in what I now look back. The metaphors are very common now. Back then they weren't, but you know, I look back as at that experience as something I would associate with maybe a minimum security prison. I can remember as a child thinking that, you know, I've woken up in some kind of nightmare here, and my parents, having grown up in the 20s and 30s, had no way to understand what I was going through. Why is it that it seems like of all the people in the world, do you have any guess as to why John Gatto has been the one above all to be able to express, you know, the quality of experience that people like myself had in our era and subsequent to that, the really inhumane quality of the public school? You framed it like no one else. How in the heck did that mantle fall on you? Any guess?
I think part of it stemmed from being raised by a cantankerous German printer. Printers have, throughout history, been trouble, and this my granddad raised me for 4 years, and during that time, he refused to allow me not to think for myself, and sometimes very violently. He insisted that I think for myself, and he taught me what would be considered, I believe, roundly as way beyond my years and station. I mean, we were talking about Hegel when I was in third grade. Not that I had much idea, but as he worked the printing press, I guess many of your listeners won't be aware that printing presses used to be two giant metal plates that slammed together, and you hand-fed one sheet at a time, and that's the kind of press he had. So I'd sit there watching his hand go between those plates and a hiss of steam, and then he would hold forth for hours. I was fascinated. So I grew up in a coal mining town in western Pennsylvania during the Second World War, and when I got to New York City, and in between advertising jobs, I was a copywriter, decided to teach for a year to clear my head. I expected that on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is one of the nation's Gold Coasts, I was very close to Columbia University and very close to the center of Manhattan, you know, the media community. Wall Street wasn't 15 minutes away. I expected some rarefied intensification of what went on in this coal mining town in western Pennsylvania, where we were reading Caesar's Gallic Wars in 7th grade and reading it in Latin in 9th grade. Well, was I surprised.
A vestige of the 19th century, it sounds like.
Was I surprised, because the diet for doctors' sons and media executive sons had been so attenuated. The status of childhood had been so artificially extended in a Manhattan public school, which was considered the rival of private schools, that we were basically reading Jack London in 7th grade, not Julius Caesar, and we were stretching it out to cover a whole term. So I was, if I say I was shocked, it wasn't a kind of political or ideological shock. Basically, I was shocked into intense boredom, and so I bought a set of Moby Dicks for my classes. Well, almost immediately, that caused huge trouble in the administrative pyramid, huge trouble. But a phenomenon occurred after a week or two of trouble, because the kids weren't used to this, that I had the only quiet classes in the whole school. This was the turbulent 60s. And yet the kids, after they cleared their head and realized they were actually going to sink their teeth into big-time ideas, they came along enthusiastically and indeed taught me a good deal that I hadn't learned about Moby Dick, and I went to 2 Ivy League colleges.
And now, Mr. Gatto, we're coming up to one of those hard breaks in radio where we do a little advertising. That's going to give you an opportunity to, as I have been doing, sip some water and sort of continue to kickstart yourself. A little later back, a couple hours later, you have an advantage on me. Anyway, we'll get through that advertisement interval and come back with John Taylor Gatto. We're going to try to, over this couple of hours we have Mr. Gatto with us, give you a sense of his unique place. I don't want to, again, front-load the interview too much or embarrass Mr. Gatto, but there is simply no one that I know of in the world like him, and no one I'd rather interview this morning or any time. Well, John, we're back on the air at 7:22 a.m. out here, just about. If I could just interrupt your train of thought a little bit. This initial experience was the opening bout of discovery. I mean, a whole sequence. I mean, you were during your career progressively on a kind of you were trying to deconstruct what was going on around you. You're trying to figure out. You knew, you were more and more aware, it seems to me, that you were part of a highly refined, a system, a contrivance, and this process eventually led to you actually doing primary research about what the origin of the system was, and I'd like to eventually get to that. But this was a phased awakening that you're going through, starting with the fact that the stuff you were asked to read with your pupils was junk.
And there's a strong element of self-interest here. If you have to spend your waking hours 5 days a week with junk, it's amazingly destructive of your own peace of mind. It's your own life being wasted. So I decided to push into any direction that I felt that I myself was lacking in, and here I would be paid to get an education. The 2 Ivy League schools and the public schools had not given me. And I also spent a year in private school. It was a Catholic boarding school, and I didn't have to open a book in public school for 4 years. After that, the intellectual diet was so advanced, and yet it was once upon a time in the era of one-room schools, it was rather common. Universally in this country, and you don't have to take my word for it. French aristocrat Alexis de Tocqueville came over here in the early 19th century and published a book that's still in print, wonderful, lively read, Democracy in America, and he marvels at the high level of intellectual development that ordinary Americans have achieved. He said it's beyond anything history knows. And he didn't even like our culture all that much, and yet he was properly respectful of the fact that ordinary people could think like the managerial classes.
When did it begin to dawn on you, though, that the system that you were bucking against, this stultifying environment you were working in, was the product of the systematic approach and not
that's exactly the right question to ask, because at first, like I think is the commonality, you just assume it's this particular school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I passed through that phase, but repeatedly when I would hit upon some way to produce excellent results with kids who weren't supposed to be capable of it, I would bring the invention to the attention of school administrators, and I would immediately find first an uneasiness and then a hostility toward this. And finally, when it occurred to me that a normal 8th grade class who's taking English shouldn't read 3 Shakespeare plays a year or 1, but they should take the whole corpus. I mean, each one of the plays is about 5,000 words long, and there are, I forget, 38 or some of them, that you could take the entire historical development of Shakespeare as well. At that point, there were massive complaints from the gifted and talented parents that this ordinary 8th grade class was producing mathematical analyses of all of Shakespeare's plays, and their kids were having their experience with Shakespeare artificially extended, to cover the term. At that point, I went beyond. I had to praise myself for the political nature of the school thing, and I knew how to do end runs to the next highest level there. But I couldn't get high enough to find anybody who actually had the power to change the way things were being done, even for one class.
Let's come back on that point. Here's another one of these little interruptions, and I apologize. We will get on back on this thread. This is very important. This business of pattern recognition in the life of John Taylor Gatto and the ultimate result. I know a lot of you are just joining us on the Jack Stockwell radio program here right at just about exactly 7:30 a.m. I'm hoping against hope I haven't been saying it's 7 p.m. this morning, but anything's possible at this hour in the morning. I'm just so delighted to have John Taylor Gatto. It would be better if I were a little more awake, but by golly, we'll take him anytime we can. And we're going to take your phone calls as well. You can call in this hour. We'll work in a few phone calls, and certainly next hour we'll really get into an exchange with the listenership here. Mr. Gatto. John, excuse me. So you knocked up against this consistent barrier. I don't want to fast forward us too much, but at some point you decided that you had got to get to the bottom of this thing, the origins of what the genesis of the system was. I'm curious, how long had you been a school teacher when you decided I'm going to go back? And you talk about esoteric knowledge. I mean, this is forgotten knowledge that you eventually dug up. No one has done it that I know of, has done research and come up with what you came up with about how this system got started. But at what point in your life did you say, I'm really gonna dig and find out what the absolute beginning of this thing was?
Well, I got bits and pieces of it throughout the first 20 years of my career, because the natural curiosity, you used the expression pattern recognition, is why this destructive pattern couldn't be tampered with or improved upon, that nobody in the administrative hierarchy had any idea why it was there. They simply knew that by altering it in any distinctive way, they would be history. So at some point, these contradictions became it became a bête noire. It just drove me to books and all the superficial stuff that's out there, the teacher college histories, did not answer these questions. Horace Mann, for example, as I later learned, had very little interest in schools. He, because of his humble family background, he was unsuitable in Massachusetts for high political office. But he was told that if he could bring about a compulsion law, that they would reserve Daniel Webster's seat in Congress for him when Webster retired. And that, of course, is exactly what happened. Mann brought the German system to the United States, the Prussian system to the United States. Anyone can verify this by simply going to a big public library or a college library in Salt Lake and reading his 7th address to the Boston School Committee, which is a paean of praise for Prussian schooling. What he didn't bother to tell the Boston School Committee was, he said that he had been there and seen it face to face, but in fact he had misjudged the time when the schools were closed, so he didn't see any of it. All of it was hearsay that he brought back. The Prussian system, which is a system of mind control, really, spread very quickly through all of Massachusetts and through all of New York, and in time it spread throughout the United States. It's a system we have in place right now, and its intentions have nothing to do with reading, writing, arithmetic, or even education. It has 6 very, very precise purposes that are meant to bring the ordinary population into harmony with an industrial commercial economy.
Well, and I think we're going to develop that, what the product of compulsory schooling is supposed to be. But a couple of questions on the way there. First of all, we should tell people, you'll never hear this from any other source that I know of, but the implementation of this system was not greeted with a lot of pleasure, happiness, fanfare, whatever.
Oh, wow.
There was. I mean, they imposed this thing on people who were not unlike your grandfather.
Here and in Canada, because the Tocqueville had pointed out to the rest of the world that the relative freedom from hierarchy that existed in early federal America, and to a great extent in colonial America, witness that we overthrew the technological paragon of the world, Great Britain, but that this explosion of imagination had been caused by the breakdown of a hierarchy, so that everyone, in a sense, is invited to the bargaining table. Now, it's true that you may have to force your way to the bargaining table, but without a rigid hierarchy, that can be done too. For some of your listeners who are keen on Adam Smith, in the beginning of Wealth of Nations, Smith says this very, very clearly. That was published in 1776. He said the key to national wealth is to get as many people cooking ideas as possible and trying entrepreneurial experiments. That's the way, not by taking command of industry and centralizing it and standardizing it.
But the wealth of the nation in total, and a decent distribution of wealth that would accrue from that was not the goal by any means of the people who were backing Horace Mann.
Not at all. Just the reverse.
Well, and John, we only have about 30 seconds before another break. Then we'll have a fairly lengthy interval without interruption. But can you just mention before we go into break who is the real who were the deep pockets? Who really purchased this system?
In Mann's case, it was the coal interests who were relying on children as the principal source of mining, including female children. The tunnels were quite small, and so they required an attitude among ordinary people and among children.
There's our break, John. Let's get this out of the way. Then we'll have a good interval with John Taylor Gatto. John, I'm sure that the mining magnates may have been the beginning of this thing, but
and then passed to the transportation, the railroad people, and from the railroad people, it passed to the phenomenal generation of industrialists led by Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Vincent Astor, the Harriman family, this inner circle of people whose like really had never existed before in the world. They weren't mean-spirited and they weren't evil-minded. Their intentions were excellent.
Would that be the same Harriman that we see in Brown Brothers Harriman?
That's them.
But John, that suggests a direct connection to the central banking families in the global financiers and even greater names that we don't hear very often. But there is a tier above and behind those people.
Yes, but there's even a tier above and beyond the people you don't hear about. But what's almost absolutely unknown is that from the 16th century on, the major thinkers, the philosophers that are studied by the best people, have all agreed that destruction of the imagination of ordinary people is the key. I want to be very specific about this, so let me start with this general statement. Destruction of the imagination of ordinary people is the key to a sane civil society and even a prosperous economy. Now, let me name some of these people directly. First, I'll name a very, very major religious name, John Calvin in 1535. Let's take him as the foundation, although we could get back before him. Calvin said in Institutes of the Christian Religion, written by a lawyer. Calvin was a superb lawyer, and he has this steel trap mind that because the Creator only selected a tiny fraction of people for salvation before they were born, that the great problem in human society is what to do with the damned who outnumber the elect 19-1. What to do with them. And Calvin specified a set of hoops to jump through where they would constantly be in competition with one another and out of the hair of the policymakers. And let's jump from John Calvin. This will be a quick trip through history to a major philosopher of the 17th century and major today, Baruch Spinoza, who wrote a book at the end of the, 1670, he published it, called Tractatus Religico-Politicus, which, by the way, was read by everyone who was anyone through Europe and through the colonies, in which he said that the great majority of the human race is permanently irrational and murderous, and therefore they have to be bound up in a net, very like the net Calvin specified, but their imaginations in particular had to be destroyed. Now let me jump to the early part of the 19th century in Prussia. Prussia had lost a major battle to Napoleon in 1806, and the country and the state was coming apart, and into the breach stepped a fellow named Fichte, Johann Fichte, who said in his addresses to the German nation, to pull them back together again, that kids had to be drawn out of all the society, locked up in compounds, and their imaginations destroyed. And now I want to come to the biggest villain of all, who certainly is not considered by many people a villain, and I'm skipping some intermediate stages here. It's Charles Darwin, who in 1859 published the book that changed the nature of intellectual life and higher learning in the world. It wasn't that book, Origin of Species, that caused the trouble. It was 12 years later he published a book called Descent of Man, which I guarantee you will be in every library in Salt Lake City, even though it's 140-odd years old.
Could you repeat the title?
Sure. Descent of Man, in which he says that evolution only occurs in a small fraction of the population. Everyone else is evolutionarily retarded, and if they crossbreed with the good material, evolution will march backwards. Let me tell you that for several years, that was the hot topic in the managerial classes of this planet, including in Asia as well. So that the idea of education, of changing the character of your mind, actually is a nonsense term. If you're biologically, let me just sort of walk you back through the names. If you're biologically defective and no cure is possible, if you're religiously damned and there is no way, there's no sin and redemption the way the silly Catholic Church said there was, if you're philosophically considered to be permanently irrational and there's no recovery from it, what we're dealing with here then is a consciousness among the people who gave us schools that the people trapped in these schools were largely, if not totally, but largely hopeless. They had to follow this kind of disguised involvement in nonsense or trivia. I don't think anyone
something suited to them.
Something suited to them, exactly. So we can dispense with the idea of deliberate evil inflicted. They were doing the work that the finest minds in history said had to be done. I mean, we could go back as far as Plato in the Republic and the Laws.
I'm trying to get my jaw off the floor here, John Gatto. Talk show hosts, radio people, political pundits, our business is rhetoric. We tend to boil things down and oversimplify as a matter of course, just to function on the radio. And when we, some of us here at K-Talk have had the bent of drawing a link between these great central banking houses and the aims of the industrialists, who to some extent are fronts for the banks in the 19th century, late 19th century. We draw this pretty little picture, A to Z, and we think that's where this stuff came from, this compulsory schooling, the dumbing down, the perpetuation, as you say, of adolescence in order to make people better workers and consumers. But the picture you're drawing for us now, and it's about as in-depth on radio of a picture you'll ever have explained to you, this thing that we experienced as a nation that has wrought such havoc in what was our dynamic and healthy culture, it's just the spear point of something that's been going on for centuries. It's just the evolutionary product of it's a diabolical thread you're describing.
Going on for centuries and collecting its power. You mentioned banking. The Rothschild family, which certainly is one of the tiny handful of coherent groups who created the world banking picture, were extremely intelligent and intellectual in many of its divisions. These ideas would provide the justification for trapping people in systems.
There's our break again, John. We'll be right back. Stay with us. John Taylor Gatto, our guest.
Utah's First Lady of Talk, Barbara Jean, weekdays noon to 2 on K-Talk.
We're very fortunate, if everything holds up as planned, to have John Taylor Gatto next hour as well. I want to let Mr. Gatto speak as freely and as fully as we can let him. But one of the things that I want to delve into is, speculative at some point, maybe next hour, what we can reasonably surmise may have been our world without this burden of this gulag, this compulsory schooling, institution of compulsory schooling. Maybe next hour we can get into that. I think we have a clue because we were not so burdened with it, and we had 150, 200 years, maybe 300 years on this continent without it, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We have some calls lining up. But, John, you were mentioning the dirty word around here, the Rothschilds family and the five brothers and all that. And I'll let you get back to that thread before we take a call or two.
Well, the formulation that commonly abroad that you alluded to earlier is right as far as it goes. These patterns are generated centrally from people who know one another, usually, often personally. The families intermarry with one another, and even if they're not aware of that is, if they don't personally know somebody in, say, Japan, they're aware of their analogs in all the nations of the world. The book to read is probably available in Salt Lake City also. It's by, Tragedy and Hope, The History of the World in Our Time, by Carol Quigley, who was the head of the government department at Georgetown. No inconsequential university. And he also was Bill Clinton's personal tutor at Georgetown. I would say there's no book comparable to Tragedy and Hope.
Yes, and he makes no apologies for that guiding class is about and what their motives are. John, I have heard of Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. I haven't read it. I have always heard that it is the one read that you.
Oh, do read it. It's a life-changing book. It's 1,200 or 1,300 pages long, but Quigley's a superb writer, and as you said, he doesn't really argue with. He himself would be in Darwin's camp, I think. Mm-hmm. He doesn't argue with this policy. What he argues with is the immorality of keeping it secret. And he writes Tragedy and Hope on that on that grounds. He reveals intimate details and names and places, dates. It's absolutely fascinating, and he hardly can be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist.
Yes,
he's a major scholar.
Didn't H.G. Wells attempt to do something similar maybe 50 years earlier and reveal, even though he wasn't part of the inner circle, they were this society, they were fascinated by him, and they shared a lot of secrets with him, did they not?
He was part of the inner circle of the Fabians. He's one of the founding members of the Fabian socialists, who are much different than any other form of socialism. They too believe that society has to be hierarchical, and rather than eliminating people with cruelty, the Fabians followed the course of eliminating them with kindness, with welfare programs and patting on the head and sing-songs in elementary school and pretty colors. But the purpose is the same. Beatrice Webb, who probably is the major Fabian, and the only woman to be buried in Westminster Abbey, by the way, she was the niece of Herbert Spencer, who created the expression survival of the fittest. And they both agreed on Uncle Herbert's deathbed that they were after the same goals, just by different methods. One with harshness and the other with kindness. So it was the debate between which would be most efficient.
Well, John, I can't remember when time has flown faster on the radio, at least for me, and folks, I'm sure a lot of you feel that same way. We're about 30 seconds or 35 seconds from another a hard break, which is our top of the hour break, where we'll also do a little news. Maybe, John, for those who are departing the audience just now, take 20 seconds, remaining 20 seconds, and give your contact data, if you would.
Yeah, you can read my big book, which sells in the stores for $35 for nothing, on my website. It's 330,000 words, and it would carry this discussion much further. It's www.johntaylorgatto.com. Taylor is Taylor. Gatto is Gatto.
There's our break, John. Stay with us. We'll be back with John Gatto after the top of the hour break.
KTKK.
No time to waste this morning. Almost 8:06 a.m. in Salt Lake City. My name is Dale Williams. I'm sitting in for Jack Stockwell, and I want to say thank you to Dr. Stockwell for the opportunity to substitute and continue my connection to all my friends in the broadcast audience of K-Talk Radio. And lots of good friends, people I have never met in person largely, but for which I feel a bond. I'm delighted to be with you again, and we have, of course, the guy who has managed to do things that no one else has quite done in the style he's done, in the depth that he has been able to reach in his research about how we got ourselves into this, or how we were put into this situation where all of our children, almost all of our children, go through compulsory schooling and turn out as really altered human beings, really unnatural human beings that are highly alienated, adjusted to a very inhumane environment, and just real tough and pretty violent, and not the kind of people you really want to be around. John Gatto, how's our connection sounding back there in New York State?
It's fine. You're quite clear.
Would you indulge me? I want to make a quote or read a quote from Dumbing Us Down. Can you handle that for a minute or two? This is just so striking. Again, Dumbing Us Down, the hidden curriculum of compulsory schooling. The underground. Well, help me out with the title of what they call the Big Fat Book.
The underground history of American education.
I always want to add an adjective that doesn't belong there. And we'll tell you how to get those books, folks, sometime in this hour interval we have with John Taylor Gatto. But from the book Dumbing Us Down, the 7-lesson school teacher is the chapter. And let me just quote this. It is the great triumph of compulsory government monopoly mass schooling that among even the best of my fellow teachers and among the best of my students' parents, only a small number can imagine a different way to do things. Quote, the kids have to know how to read and write, don't they? They have to know how to add and subtract, don't they? They have to learn to follow orders if they ever expect to keep a job. Only a few lifetimes ago, things were very different in the United States. Originality and variety were common currency. Our freedom from regimentation made us the miracle of the world. Social class boundaries were relatively easy to cross. Our citizenry was marvelously confident, inventive, and able to do many things independently, to think for themselves. We were something. We were something. We Americans, all by ourselves, without government sticking its nose into our lives, without institutions and social agencies telling us how to think and feel. No, all by ourselves, we were something as individuals. We've had a society increasingly under central control in the United States since just before the Civil War. And such a society requires compulsory schooling, government monopoly schooling to maintain itself. Before the society changed, schooling wasn't very important anywhere. We had it, but not too much of it, and only as much as an individual wanted. People learned to read, write, and do arithmetic just fine anyway. There are some studies which show literacy at the time of the American Revolution, at least on the eastern seaboard, as close to total. Tom Paine's Common Sense sold 600,000 copies to a population of 2,500,000, 20% of which was slave and another 50% indentured. Were the colonists geniuses? No. The truth is that reading, writing, and arithmetic only take about 100 hours to transmit, as long as the audience is eager and willing to learn. The trick is to wait until someone asks and then move fast while the mood is on him. Millions of people teach themselves these things. It really isn't very hard. Pick up a fifth-grade textbook in math or rhetoric from 1850, and you'll see that the texts were pitched then on what would today be college level. Now, here's the kicker, folks, and that's my quote. The continuing cry for quote-unquote basic skills practice is a smokescreen behind which schools preempt the time of children for 12 years and teach them the 7 lessons I just taught you. I'm not sure we'll get to all that detail of 7 lessons, John, but does your mind ever sort of wander into the possibilities of what the world around us would be like without compulsory schooling, if we were in the company always of what would be the equivalent of homeschooled normal people?
Well, certainly that was one of the triggers for what I've now been doing for an awfully long time. Any one of your listeners can access what the world would have been like without this institutionalization of our population simply by reading Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. That's about 100 pages long, very easy to read. It'll be in every library in Salt Lake, and Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Both men participated in what the world could be like. De Tocqueville as a reporter and an astounded auditor, and Franklin as a major participant who, at the age of 11, was working 60 hours a week at a real job, and in his spare time with his friends, putting himself through a curriculum that I guarantee you Harvard or Yale wouldn't dream of asking from its undergraduates.
Is it true that most children in the 18th century in the United States showed up at school and their first day of school knowing how to read? I've heard that.
Well, most schools wouldn't admit you if they didn't want to waste time on teaching reading or counting, the arithmetic operations.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, so most people did, and it's not beyond the power of an ordinary person with an ordinary occupation to teach these things. They're quite easy to learn. I mean, an awful lot of people, Dale, even today, teach themselves to read, and you'll hear a delighted parent saying, well, I had no idea that she, my 4-year-old daughter could actually read. How did she learn that? There's a school in Philadelphia called the Institute for the Achievement of Human Potential. It's in some very fancy part of Philadelphia, and in fact, they teach, now I hesitate to even say this, but they teach babies to read and to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, so that before the age of 5, I visited this school once about 7 years ago, and I'm sitting with a group of 7-year-olds or 6-year-olds or 5-year-olds, and when they're done, the teacher says, why don't we do a scene from the Mikado for Mr. Gatto, our visitor? And they instantly broke into songs from the Mikado. And I said, well, how were these kids selected? Oh, we said they come from all over. They're self-selected. We take anybody in without any screening at all, if they want to. And what we attempt to do is teach in 3 weeks the parents how to teach their own kids. And they're obviously and always the best teacher if they're willing and eager, regardless of their background.
Well, the sky is the limit when we live just a natural life outside the control of our captors. I'm curious, John, as a person who has spent much of your adult life in the public school and around public school children, what is it like to go and have dinner at a home where maybe there are 4 or 5 children, all homeschooled, never touched by this experience of having to get on the prison bus and head for the school? And you must, as a scientist, do a little control comparison there. Tell me about that.
I feel as if, and we're making the contrast now between the homeschool families I've visited and had dinner with and socialized with, and the standard of my public school experience. I feel like I'm talking to people, whatever their ages are in the homeschooled setting. And when I teach inside a classroom, even the so-called best classrooms, I'm dealing with people whose reality has been so severely diminished that they don't have authentic existences at all. They're looking for some way to gain my favor, or make a connection that'll lead to something material for them. They're competitive in the worst possible way. And before I visited homeschool classes, I used to ask myself the question in Manhattan, is this the end of the journey that began on the Mayflower? And it just seemed horrifying to me. But the very first few times I got to visit homeschooled families, even ones that were worried that they were doing the right thing, I said, there really is a future. It's taking place in semi-secret, but it's happening.
Sure.
And I've watched it grow and multiply geometrically. So the very existence of so many homeschooled families now causes a question to enter the minds of lots of other people who don't quite have the courage to do it, but they themselves are being, I think, enlightened a bit for the next generation.
Well,
certainly among school teachers.
What a burden on that. Those, is it 1.5 million families roughly doing it right now, homeschooling?
Yeah, the statistics are soft because the government has a vested interest in keeping the number as small as possible so that if official sources issue the number you just did, I would imagine it's somewhat larger than that.
Mm-hmm.
But really, 25 years ago, they were just as scarce as hen's teeth.
Well, they were facing punitive action by local government, and we've had people killed in the state of Utah over the issue. So it was pretty serious, even in the 70s.
You know, the great irony about Utah is that Brigham Young writes compellingly and hostilely against the idea of government schooling, not once but a number of times. And he's very specific what damage will be caused. And it's as if, the Utah pioneer who's otherwise celebrated, everyone agrees to ignore. Not everyone, of course, but you know what I mean.
Well, he knew what the game was, and the Industrial Revolution was 50, 60, 70 years old by the time he was doing his writings. I'm sure he understood the trends. We're going to take our first commercial break. If you're just joining us, it's the inimitable John Taylor Gatto, and what a burden that homeschooling kids, those several million kids, are going to have to shoulder. That part of our society, essentially, they constitute people who do not have that distorted lens, who are not fighting animals, who are going to grow up as into adult personalities in the transactional analysis sense. When we come back, your phone calls as well for John Taylor Gatto.
Attention patriots, are you concerned about America? Would you like solutions to nearly every problem facing our nation today? Then come to the Making of America seminar, Saturday, August 25th in Sandy, Utah. Discover the amazing wisdom of the Founding Fathers and learn about America's great success formula as taught by Dr. Cleon Skousen. To register, go to www.easysite.com/Making of America. That's www.easysite.com/Making of America. Or call 801-226-1111. The Making of America seminar is an event that will enlighten and inspire your whole family. Don't miss it. Call 801-226-1111.
Just as well, we'll get on and talk with John Taylor Gatto and now begin to bring some telephone calls into the mix. John, before we do that, it is such a challenge, I have to tell you, as a host, to try to calculate what the scope of a conversation like this is going to be in this very constricted time space and with all these interruptions. I haven't given you a chance to sort of go where you want to go very much here. Is there something particularly stuck in your craw or that you would think would be helpful for our audience this morning?
Oh, there is. There is. Obviously, or perhaps not so obviously, the managers are also family people, the people who manage this system. And I'm not talking about state boards of education, but the groups that you alluded to earlier. And I was curious, after a few years, how they raised their own kids. I mean, what diet or menu was put before their own kids? And I figured that a lot of it would be concentrated in the elite private boarding schools, out of which a huge fraction of American leadership comes. I want to disabuse your audience that I'm talking about private schools now, most of them function a lot like public schools, although they're safer and probably more congenial. But I'm talking about the inner circle elite private boarding schools, names like Hotchkiss, or the ones that most people have heard of, or Exeter and Andover. There are about 20 of these places, and what they do is available initially by just getting their catalogs and their admissions information, and then there are a number of books written about it. So for the past 10 years, I've been looking into the curriculum of elite private boarding school, a composite. And what I found fascinated me because the guiding principles don't cost a single penny. That is to say, a family in the ghetto, if they were so minded and disciplined, could avail themselves of the same exercises and the same set of goals that you would get if you went to Groton. Which, for those again of your listeners that this idea is new to, let me point out that the sitting president went to an elite private boarding school, one of the top 10 in the country, Andover, and he defeated his opposite number, Gore, who went to an elite private boarding school, one of the top 10, St. Mark's. Franklin Roosevelt went to the most elite of all of the schools, Groton. Kerry, who ran against Bush, went to probably the number 2 elite private boarding school in the country. I'm sorry, the name slightly eludes me. It'll probably come back in a moment. John F. Kennedy, one of the top 10 elite private boarding schools, Choate. I mean, we find these people represented in leadership positions to such an inordinate extent that I said, let me find out how their curriculum differs from a gifted and talented public school curriculum. And so I'd like to just touch a few of these bases.
Sure. And we have about 90 seconds to our break. We can carry on the thread after the break as well.
Let me start with the one that's most important to me. Literacy to almost all of us signals an ability to read. And it is one of the literacies. It's the passive literacy. There are 2 literacies that are active, and they were once just commonly understood in the United States to be exceedingly important. So important that in colonial America, it was made a crime to teach ordinary people public speaking and writing. Now, public speaking isn't standing up and making a presidential stump speech. That's, of course, one variety of it. There are hundreds of varieties. You and I are engaging in one right now. Speaking and writing allow you to spread your ideas, to recruit allies, and so that's not something that ordinary people should be able to do. Reading on a fairly functional level is necessary because the boss can leave behind instructions on what you're supposed to do, and you read them and you do them. Of course, high-level reading is also out because that would give you access to ideas of people like Kant or Spinoza or Hegel or Plato. So the active literacies are at the center of an elite private boarding school curriculum.
Let's come right back on that thread, John. Here we are. I think we've got the cadence of these breaks down pretty well now. But it's a short interruption, and then right back to John Taylor Gatto.
Jack Stockwell in the morning on K-Talk.
So, John, you were talking about the real meaningful definition of literacy, real 19th century style literacy, not the proletarian literacy that we're have shoved down our throat. The definition that we're presented with as worker bees.
Notice that the expression active literacies has vanished from the language, even though 100 years ago it was quite a common expression. If you don't know about, I mean, we're going to Orwell here. If you don't know how to name something, you can't really talk about it or even think about it, except in the vaguest terms. So that's one of the central themes of an elite private boarding school. Another one is that you read history, philosophy, literature, theology, economics, not primarily for the technical information, but to abstract from it a theory of human nature in different circumstances. And if you keep that foremost in your mind, that this is what you're after, not memorizing 150 facts for a test, I guarantee you that there is not a classroom of kids so debased that they don't rise to that game very quickly and enthusiastically. Another thing that the boarding schools stress is the ability to work independently and self-teach. So they never do too much in any direction. If you want to pursue that course, you're encouraged to pursue it independently. Another thing they do is offer a comprehensive theory of access to any workplace, any environment, any social order, any person. How would you put yourself into those situations? How would you get a job as a broadcaster or anything like that? They urge people to find a solo sport like riding or sailing. Now, those would cost a lot of money, or long-distance walking, something involving physical effort and some danger. They want their students to be at ease with major creations in music, painting, design, drama, literature, dance, sculpture, not for the hoity-toity social value of that, but to enlarge their own imaginations, to jumpstart those.
Unrestricted vistas.
Say again?
Well, it's an unrestricted vista. I mean, you know, you're presenting a young human being with an horizon that is not, I mean, there's no end to the potential, is what you're.
Well, notice that what you've touched is in the information technology set is the hottest idea around, and that's open source learning versus controlled source learning. I think over the next 2 or 3 decades, there's going to be a revolution here. I mean, businesses are beginning to turn to open source information to solve their problems rather than going to the technical expert in the country. One of the biggest gold mines in the world, Gold Corp, it's a Canadian corporation, had a limited amount of money and a huge piece of land to locate an ore body they were certain was on that. They needed to know which direction and at what depth the thing would go because they only had enough money to go down once. So instead of bringing in the recognized geological experts in this area, they simply offered it on the Internet, large cash prizes for anybody, no limitation on who could construct a compelling theory of where their gold body was. And after a year or two, somebody who came from no mining background at all created, a model. They bought the model. They spent their money going down there, and by God, they're a huge. They located a huge ore body.
I must interject a brief quotation from some of your writing again, John. Quote, "I've noticed a fascinating phenomenon in my 25 years of teaching that schools and schooling are increasingly irrelevant to the great enterprises of the planet. No one believes anymore that scientists are trained in science classes or politicians in civic classes or poets in English classes. The truth is that schools don't really teach anything except how to obey orders." That you have a way of putting your finger on the thing. And as you're talking, John Gatto, there's such pathos implicit in your message, because I'm, in my own mind, as a sort of a listener here, I'm juxtaposing the role of the public school teacher, which is that of sort of an indoctrinator policeman, with what that role could be, which is a true mentor and a companion on a wonderful journey, mentoring another human being that's not very far, removed from your own experience, maybe a generation or so, 20, 30 years, and you take that journey together, or you shepherd them along a part of the way. It's a beautiful thought, and boy, when you put it in the context of the cruelty of the public school, it is really
right.
so
You're
sad.
right on target. Yes, I think if there's time, I actually was able to locate, after years of digging, the actual theoretical principles that lie behind public schooling. There's 6 of them, and they're eye-openers, and I want to give you the source of these so that your listeners will take them with some credibility. Harvard University has an honor lecture in education each year called the Ingalls Lecture, spelled I-N-G-L-I-S. And it's named after a Harvard professor who published a book in 1917 with the dull title, Principles of Secondary Education. And indeed, the book is excruciating to read. However, if you're diligent and hang on, in the middle of this volume, Ingalls says, here are the 6 purposes of public schooling.
John, maybe I should let you get a sip of water and relax for a minute, and we will come back on those 6 principles. You can get through them, and then before a lynch mob arrives at the station, made up of disgruntled callers on hold, we'll get to the phone interaction after those 6 goals, after we get a chance to enunciate those. When we come back, a couple of intervals left. Well, it looks like 2 decent intervals with John Taylor Gatto. So you stay right there. It's Dale Williams sitting in for Jack Stockwell this morning. Thanks, Samantha. And John Gatto, we're back on the air now, and have available that time to move through those 6 principles of secondary education you wanted the folks to know.
Okay, so from your listener's perspective, this is straight from the top of the Planning Commission. Here is what public schooling is meant to achieve. The first purpose is to establish fixed habits of response to authority. Through bells, buzzers, tests, commands, students learn to respond reflexively to orders. But an irony exists, and this is going to solve a puzzle in many people's minds about why schools seem to be so stupid. You can't test whether somebody's reflexively obedient if you give sensible orders. The only way to test reflexive obedience is to mix ordinary commands with idiotic ones. If good discipline could be achieved in such small things as regulating the need to urinate, then the first function of schooling, Ingalls called it the adjustive function, could be successfully installed over a 12-year school sequence. The second function...
Could you repeat that phrase?
Which phrase?
The shorthand version of the first point, fixed habits of response to authority. How did he express it?
He called the 6 functions of schooling. The first function was the adjustive function, and what that measures is the degree of reflexive obedience to authority that you, any teacher could tell you that a good part of the grade in any class is based on how obedient you are, really. The second function is the diagnostic function. Schools are supposed to determine each student's proper social role and then to arrange things so that the future assigned will have the best chance to be brought to fruition. The doctor's son, for instance, will never find himself in a class of ruffians or one marked with poverty, regardless of his test performance. The third function is the sorting function. As soon as the student's destination in the social machine is established, he or she is going to be trained only as far as that destination requires and not a bit further. If you're going to be a ditch digger, you don't need to know quadratic equations. The fourth function arises directly from the needs of a mass production economy. Students of all social classes, right up to the top, have to be made to conform to a limited range of human responses. As closely as possible, they should think alike, whatever their school ranking, in order to make their behavior statistically predictable. That's essential to a mass production economy. Market research for business and government demands this, demands standardization, not standards. For instance, war propaganda could produce the desired enthusiasm to punish the enemy only if most of the people hearing it have the same value buttons installed. The fifth function of schooling is the creepy one. It's called the hygienic function, and that means not keeping your hands clean, but protecting the health of the race. Charles Darwin had counseled this course in his 1871 book, The Descent of Man, and the policy circles of the developed world from America to faraway Japan took this advice very seriously. At universities like Stanford and Yale, actual course offerings discussed means to pull this project of controlling evolution by social engineering off long before the mass slaughters of World War I, where millions of working class people were marched into cannon and machine gun fire in situations with no obvious military objective. See Gallipoli, rent that film. Their fate has been decided by policy. You're going to eliminate the bad breeding stock. Schools can't shoot marginalized children, but they can encourage an artificial extension of childhood in which the young grow older, but they never grow up. And the final function of schooling, according to Ingalls, was to train a very small number of people to understand the real role of schools as a management aid to business and government. This leadership cadre is conditioned to perpetuate the system generation after generation. And Ingalls called this, by a fancy Latin word, the propaidutic function. And those are the 6 purposes of schooling. They have nothing to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Well, there it is. That is the Rosetta Stone of public school, ladies and gentlemen. That's one of the unique things about John Taylor Gatto. He dug in and found the horse and figured out what was coming out of the horse's mouth, and has organized it in books like The Underground History of American Education, so that we can understand what's been perpetrated on us, and eventually it will lead, maybe after you and I are long gone, John Gatto, it will lead to the overthrow of this system, one hopes. We got a whole bunch of calls that are waiting.
Okay.
Let's dive into them and see what the story is. A question in brief, if you would, callers. The Utah County line is open, 470-5855. Weaver North Davis, that's open to 670-5855. And, of course, in Salt Lake City, you have 254-5855 as they become available. Salt Lake City, you're on the line.
Hi, Dale and John. So, John, who's the mastermind behind the destruction of the people's imagination, and how long has this been going on?
Well, it's really been going on since Plato and probably before him, but I can specifically target several bases, which I did earlier in the show. Calvin, in Institutes of the Christian Religion, for perfectly good cause, said that the damned, who comprise about 95% of the human race, and they're damned before birth, have to be bound up. There are too many of them to jail or eliminate violently. They have to be bound up in meaningless competitions with one another, and they have to be misled so that the computer dictum, garbage in, garbage out, their imaginations can't conceive of a better way. From Calvin, we go to the secular philosopher Spinoza, who published in 1670 a tract read by really every political manager on this planet, and still read, which said that people are so permanently irrational, except for a small fraction, that this irrationality has to be neutralized by locking up the kids long enough together that their imaginations can be destroyed. And if we move another 137 years in history to Prussian Germany in the beginning of the 19th century, Johann Fichte, in addresses to the German nation, lays down, chapter and verse, the school system that we have, and announces that one of its principal objectives is to destroy the imagination and to make free will meaningless, that the people's imagination will be so stunted that they'll be unable to conceive of any other reality than what they're told by somebody else.
John, we're at one of those unfortunate breaks again. It's a chance for you to get another sip of water. We'll have our final break and then our final segment. I apologize for the abrupt cutoff of our guest. I want to give him every chance to speak that we can, and so we run up to the breaks rather abruptly. But we will be back for another interval with John Taylor Gatto right after this commercial interruption. Okay, we have but maybe 4 minutes left with our guest, John Taylor Gatto. I want to, towards the end of that interval, give Mr. Gatto a chance to give his contact data again. We haven't talked much about these marvelous books, which will just go on for decades, if not centuries, causing trouble for the establishment. What an irony that a lot of our troubles are bound up in some of the precepts of Protestant religion and the Reformation, a subject to get into in more depth on another occasion, I suppose. Chris in Salt Lake County, go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. It's good to talk to you both.
Thank you.
John, I tend to be a political animal. Right now, education is basically a political football in the United States. I'd like to know, I have my own views, but I'd like to know your spin on what we need to do politically to straighten this out. Who do you think we should be supporting in the way of organizations, parties, candidates, things like that?
Thank you, Chris.
Chris, I don't think, I'm not being cynical, I don't think there's the slightest difference between the two political parties except cosmetic. And I don't think this problem can be solved from the top down for the simple reason that it is far and away the largest part of the American economy. It's the largest employer. I mean, we're not just talking about school teachers and administrators, but people who write, print, deliver school books. We're talking about the layoff position for the American farming industry of surplus production. We're talking about the fulcrum of the entire economy. It can only be justified if they can drain all the children out of the community, and hold them in this abeyance. So I don't think there is a solution from that. That doesn't mean that you don't try to keep these ideas current and that you don't try to pick the best of bad choices. But they are bad choices. The homeschoolers have taken the political lead and simply declared schooling irrelevant. If in the public mind a distinction could be made between schooling, which is what you do with fish, and education, which is an amazingly wonderful and inexpensive way to have a good life, to write yourself the curriculum for a good life, I think that in time we would erode away the legitimacy of this thing. In fact, it's being eroded away. The homeschoolers started in the 70s with about an estimated 20,000 American families. And you heard Dale say earlier, now an estimated 1.5 million families. Well, there are no billboards advocating homeschooling that I know of. I mean, it's passed by word of mouth and people seeing what the human products of this process are. Also, it strengthens families. I mean, it's not just a one-way beneficence. I mean, the parents learn quite a bit about themselves in doing it.
John Taylor Gatto, time is against us now. I want to tell you, just sort of man to man, this has been a privilege for me to be with you for these 2 hours, and I hope we can do it again. You know, circumstances are hard to predict for so many of us now. You know, in the times that are right ahead of us, times of dynamic change and probably a lot of trouble. But if we never speak again for some reason, it's been a privilege. I want to give you the last 45 seconds or so to suggest titles, let people know about those great titles you've produced and how to get them, and then we'll sign off.
Sure. I've published 3 books about schools so far, and they're all available on www.johntaylorgatto.com. The largest of the titles and the most expensive, Underground History, can be read entirely on the website. I hope you don't do that and buy a copy that this work can continue, but if that's not possible. Dale, you did a good interview. Could you send me an air check of this, please?
I will do my best to obtain one. And God bless you, John Taylor Gatto, and guard your health. We all are interested in your continuance.
And God bless you all in Utah, and I look forward to being with you again. Goodbye now.
Bye-bye.
KTKK.
Fire starting in my heart, reaching a fever pitch, and it's bringing me out the dark. Finally, I can see you crystal clear. Go ahead and sell me out, and I'll lay your shit bare. See how I'll leave with every piece of you. Don't underestimate the things that I will do. There's a fire starting in my heart, reaching a fever pitch, and it's bringing me out the dark. The scars of your love remind me